Now, I would like to thank Rosalia and the conference organisers at Ordo Iuris and Leo from the ECPM as conference sponsors for inviting me to Poland on this special day. The 10th of December 2018 is not just the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is also, as Leo pointed out, the 10th anniversary of another text, the Universal Declaration of Human Dignity, which was subsequently publicly launched by the then Speaker of the European Parliament, Hans-Gert Pöttering. Now, I shall refer, this is important, okay, to avoid any confusion as I'm speaking. I'm going to refer to this second text, the Universal Declaration of Human Dignity, as the declaration in these remarks. So if I say the declaration, I'm talking about the Declaration on Human Dignity, not the Declaration on Human Rights. And in my view, one cannot have human rights without the recognition of human dignity which stands beneath it. Why is this so important? Leo read it out. I'm going to read it out again from the preamble of the Declaration. Excuse me, I made my own mistake there. I'm going to quote from the Declaration of Human Dignity here. It is impossible to deny the source of man's transcendent dignity and at the same time maintain that such dignity exists. Yet the school of humanism tried to do just this. And with its inevitable failure, man has been left in the precarious state of having no inherent rights other than those which the social community deigns to confer on him. Do we really feel more secure, or do we even really want to live in a society where, to repeat, man has been left in the precarious state of having no inherent rights other than those which the social community deigns to confer on him? As our declaration states, the mutuality of the parallel concepts of human rights and human dignity and their interdependence is definitively institutionalized in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is the text here that Leo read out. Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. But this, for me, is the central problem with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which makes no attempt to explain the source of our rights beyond a vague, undefined reference to human dignity. So this is a very serious problem indeed, and I shall explain precisely why at the end. What I'd like to do is just indicate an example of a political system that I think gets it right, which is the US Declaration of Independence, which isn't the basis of human rights. It's the basis of a whole system of government, which is far more profound. And this is what Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. Now that's the perfect way of explaining this, because it clearly says man is made by God, and therefore man has certain properties which governments are made to protect and to defend. The Declaration of Human Dignity therefore recognizes that people form their politics out of their most deeply held principles and convictions, and then continues from that recognition to argue that a society which holds within the very deepest vault of its culture a belief that God's fullest revelation to mankind was in the person of Jesus Christ, that he created all men equal, that the central commandment to his people was for them to love one another, that man is the purposeful creation of a benevolent God, such will have a very different political praxis from one which believes man to be an accidental and meaningless product of survival of the fittest, the exaltation of the strong, the elimination of the weak, nature red in tooth and claw. This neatly delineates the current situation perfectly. The two rival anthropologies, man as animal and man as made in the image and likeness of God, which have been vying for power in the West since the French Revolution. The Declaration on Human Dignity takes a decisive position in its opening words. The true nature of man is that he is not an animal, but a human being made in the image and likeness of God, his creator. This image and likeness of God was called, as Leo pointed out, by medieval scholastics as the Imago Dei, which literally means the image of God. And the Declaration on Human Dignity says it is precisely the Imago Dei that man acknowledges within himself with such profound awe and respect to call human life sacred, and to which the moral sense testifies certain properties as being inalienable, indelible in every single human life from conception until natural death. And here is the key passage which relates a Judeo-Christian anthropology with human rights, stating that it is these above-mentioned certain properties which have come to be known in the modern secular state as fundamental human rights, and the most complete expression of human dignity is therefore to be found only in recognizing man's true anthropological and existential nature, and that this recognition lies at the foundation of all that the world calls civilization. It is important to note that in the same way the Imago Dei understanding of man did not come out of nowhere, so too its defense will not come out of nowhere either. This is precisely why the Judeo-Christian tradition is essential for the preservation of ideas that it itself gave rise to. As the Declaration on Human Dignity says, the Christian faith is the historic source of man's political dignity. There are many legislatures that include MPs who understand that Christianity is not inimical to the principal values cherished by society, and that it is in fact the spiritual midwife of them. What are these principal values? The Declaration continues. Such ideas as the inviolable and inalienable rights of the human person, universal suffrage, the rule of law and equality before the law are specifically manifestations of the Judeo-Christian tradition, even if individual proponents of these causes were not consciously acting because of religious imperatives. Western civilization is a historic collection of countries with strong identities formed and influenced through the Christian faith, and that it is only through the full, conscious and active participation of this faith in the public square that recognition of the Imago Dei can be most authentically nourished. And this is why there is such essential and necessary complementarity between human dignity and human rights. Recognizing man's rights as intrinsic to his being and not the product of legal charters is essential to sustaining liberty in a free society. Work done to promote such a view of human dignity thereby promotes the foundation of all human rights. As the Declaration itself identifies, it is the recognition of the dignity of man that is most lacking in our society, not rights, and that this imbalance must be redressed. Therefore, tying these passages together, it is clear in the Declaration that in order to protect the integrity of a secular human rights-based framework, we need a strong underpinning of the Judeo-Christian tradition beneath it. And when one considers how deeply the culture of death, as John Paul II repeatedly called it, is entrenched in the West, the consequences of losing sight of the fact that every single member of the human race is made in the image and likeness of God ought to be clear. In fact, it is always the most vulnerable in our society who have the most to lose by this denial: the unborn, the elderly, the terminally sick. I just did this bit of research because Leo had reminded me of something. Getting it wrong when talking about human dignity as the basis for law does have very real consequences. And misapplying the definition, one can justify the very opposite of what an authentic interpretation of the concept is supposed to protect. A lot of the arguments about the dignity being the right to choose for the elderly, for euthanasia, have nothing to do with compassion, I don't think. More to do with the state trying to save itself some money. Here's a statistic for you, which I think would be helpful to bear in mind every time you hear a debate talking about euthanasia. And this is according to a 2004 study, that 30% of all Medicare expenditures in the United States is attributed to the 5% of beneficiaries that die each year, with 1/3 of that cost in the last month of life. Medical attention for the seriously and terminally ill is phenomenal and consumes a huge proportion of the amount of care that the state will spend on any single human being. Statistically, it's in that last period of life. If it can be designed, even using language, talking in the favor of giving people choice, that when people are sick and elderly, that they choose to die first, that is a huge saving for the treasury of any country. And just, as I would say, worth to remember that point when you hear people talking about dignity being applied to the right to the sick to kill themselves. All of the battles that the church has been fighting and losing in the public square over the last couple of decades, it has been losing precisely because of the denial of the Imago Dei, failing to address the basis of the infinite value of each human life. Legislatures around the world are currently engaged in a dangerous agenda based on a distorted understanding of the human person, which is literally fatally flawed. The precepts upon which human rights are founded are being hollowed out and undermined, and that this agenda continues to corrupt man's true nature, eroding the dignity of life and diminishing the humanity of man. From this warning, the Declaration proposes a solution. The fact that the dignity of man and the state conferred human rights that recognize this dignity proceeds from the image and likeness of God, which is within us. Therefore, in believing man is created in the image and likeness of God lies the only sure protection of man's dignity and correspondingly also of his rights. So how is our society doing putting this Imago Dei-based recognition of human dignity back at the basis of our culture? Well, I just want to say a bit now about what the Dignitatis Humanae Institute is and how it started. As Leo was pointing out, we launched this operation at the very end of the 2004-2009 mandate of the European Parliament. And it was launched by Hans-Gert Pöttering. Now, he happened to have been speaker. No, excuse me. It was the same composition of MEPs. He wasn't speaker at the first half of that mandate, but it was the same, exactly the same composition of MEPs that almost 5 years before had blocked Rocco Buttiglione in his nomination by the then Italian government for serving as vice president of the European Commission. Now, I don't know if anyone, I suppose you'll know Rocco Buttiglione, you know? Reasonable philosopher, close friend of JP2. This is not a religious extremist by any definition whatsoever, but he was blocked by the Justice and Home Affairs Commission of the European Parliament. In the words of Michael Cashman, who led the veto against the Buttiglione nomination, he was blocked not because of anything he'd ever said, but because of what, as a Catholic, he might believe. And all he'd ever said was that he believed that homosexuality was a sin and not a crime. That sort of decapitated his chances of serving as vice president of the European Commission. So that was in 2004. Towards the end of that very same legislature, we launched this project as a bridge, really, for Christians, the Catholic Church, Protestants working together to give a platform to Christian politicians in public life to be publicly Christian in their work, because there is this expectation, and it's really only applied to Christians. I've never seen it applied to Muslims or Jews or Freemasons or communists, but it is made this suggestion to Christians that you must divest yourself of your most dearly held principles in order to participate as an actor in public life, in politics. And when you do so, you have to do so neutrally. Now, I've never seen that suggestion made to a Muslim, as I say, or any other faith community, that they have to de-religiousize themselves before it is appropriate. But it is made to Christians. So we came up with this declaration as a statement trying to help the church and Christians explain why their presence as Christians isn't a hindrance to a rights-based culture, but reminding people that it is actually Christianity, or I should say the Judeo-Christian tradition, which gave rise to those rights which are now under attack. Because, as Leo pointed out, and what he said about discrimination could easily be applied as well to the concept of tolerance, which is you are tolerated in as far as you agree to our latest diktats, rather than, as Leo said, word perfectly, tolerance ought to be as, well, this is what I believe, you believe that, and let's get on together. That's not how it is anymore. So that, and the other thing I would just say, because Leo said to me beforehand, just to say a little bit about how we work with this, the European Parliament's working group on human dignity. We've had over the years, since this was 10 years ago today, as I say, it's the anniversary, this working group brings in basically once a month, possibly a little less than that these days, but a commissioner or a diplomat or an MEP or a philanthropist or a journalist, what have you, a figure in public life, who will come to these meetings are packed meetings, you know, and they will of members and civil society. These working groups are, and these people, the guest speakers, will talk. Just one speaker per meeting, and they will talk about how their faith in Jesus Christ propelled them into public life, and to promote the public good as they have been doing. The reason that, as I say, the reason that we picked that specific strategy was to counter the argument that Christians ought not be Christian in their public life, because there's something wrong about forcing your ideas on other people. So to try to suggest to the more secular members of the European Parliament that it's not a case of forcing one's beliefs on other people, but is actually the motivation for huge swathes of people, not just in public life, but right throughout civil society, of people coming into the public square and trying to promote the common good. It's because they believe in God. Okay, and that's the modality of our working group on human dignity in the European Parliament. And I wouldn't mind, just before finishing these remarks, I wouldn't mind just suggesting a different axis when we're measuring, when we're talking about being left-wing or right-wing, because those terms can often, well, they mean different things to different people, and they're pretty much useless anyway. But the term I use, the axis that I use in this concept, is between a society on the hard left, on the far left of the x-axis, would be a society which denies all individuality to the human person and only recognizes the human person once they join society. And that is the philosophy that you basically find in any totalitarian regime. It's the denial of the individual and the exaltation of the social collective. And I'd like to propose that, following that x-axis along, that perhaps a more genuine term of right-wing would be the very opposite, which would be a society based solely on the recognition of the individual, and didn't give any preferential treatment to that collective entity that is what you get when individuals enter society. And that's the point here. I mean, that's really the point, because it's the recognition or the denial of the individual that gives us the difference between a totalitarian society and a free society. And here now I'm going to finally state explicitly the great danger to modern society, which I said at the beginning of my speech I'd leave to the end. And Timotheus also alluded to it as well in his remarks, because this is a very real threat. So bringing all of these points together, the closing words of the Universal Declaration of Human Dignity are therefore an urgent warning. The unprecedented danger for a culture which accepts liberties as granted by the state is because that which is the state's to give is also the state's to take away. And Timotheus said that explicitly, and it's absolutely right. And that's very rarely where we are these days. And whilst international charters may recognize certain rights arising out of human dignity, no one should dare to presume that such charters can ever in themselves be the source of such rights. This is the very real threat of the modern human rights-based secular experiment, which denies for ideological reasons the only possible basis for such rights and makes the state the author of them rather than their protector. That which is the state's to give is also the state's to take away. Therefore, I hope that today, on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 10th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Dignity, we can agree on the need to bind these two texts together. As the closing words of the Declaration state, recognition of fundamental human rights in their fullest capacity demands the recognition of their source, that our true rights lie ineluctably beyond and infinitely transcend any charter, no matter how well-intentioned the attempt to codify them, and that the preeminent human right is to have one's humanity recognized as being made in the image and likeness of God. Now, I can only briefly highlight on this occasion the arguments set forth in this text. The best thing to do, if anyone is interested, is to go online and sign it at dignitatishumanae.com. Thank you so much.